Hello and welcome back to another Python's tutorial. We're going to continue talking about functions. Uh, this video will focus on two, I think, important concepts of functions that a lot of times don't get talked about in a beginner level course, which is the use case of the args and the KW-args. I'm sure it has a way to pronounce it, but I always call it KW-args and args. These two ways to pass in parameters are very useful, especially in a case where you built the function and it does an operation, but you want to make it more dynamic. Like you don't want to have to hard code how many like entries it can handle if it's doing the exact same operation the whole time. You want to make it where people can like pass in different numbers of parameters and stuff like that, even though your piece of code didn't account for that in the front end. You can pass it as an arg, and what the arg does, when you pass it as a star arg, the star helps it identify the length of your list. One is kind of for a list pass, and then it would take in those items and be able to handle the operations within inside the function. Even though you didn't set that thing to take in like 6 items, maybe you set it up for 3 items, but now somebody passed in 6 items and the function doesn't break. You don't have to go back and rewrite code. The difference between the two is that since the args takes in lists and the dictionary KWs takes in dictionaries, the dictionary way allows you to like pass in based on the key value pairs. So you could pass in one dictionary that has a set of data sets that it's passing in, and based on the name of it inside the function, you use that name to access those elements, so you can actually do the operations. I know this sounds like a lot of talk and stuff up front, but when you see an example, I'm gonna try to show you an example that ensures that you kind of see why it's a nice tool to have in your tool belt when you're working on functions. All right, so let's get started, and I hope you enjoy this one-on-one session. All right, so again, like I just spoke about, this video is going to cover 2 topics. It's going to cover the args option and the KW args option. All right, so args, like I said, you can put an asterisk before whatever you're passing, and it'll pass it as an arg set. It's going to get the count of the length of the argument that comes in when you do that, and then it'll go ahead and run the applications from that perspective. All right, so let me try to think, is there anything else I need to talk about before I start creating anything? I will say though, I think there was one more aspect I need to discuss. All right, never mind. All right, we'll move forward. All right, so first, what we're going to do, we're just going to create a function. Let's create a function that adds numbers. I think this would be the easiest example to do it. So we're going to create a function called def myAdd, and what it's going to do, I'm going to do open parentheses here, and it's going to take 3 numbers. So we'll call it number. It takes in number 1. It's gonna be a second number and then a third number. Okay, and then we do the colon, enter. So that's gonna, anything, remember the indentation concept, anything in the tab indentation is with that actual function. So all we're going to do with this function is going to we'll do it with a variable. In here I'm gonna make a local variable. Oh, I can't call it my sum is equal to nums nums1 plus nums2 plus nums3. Okay, and then what I want to do is return this value back, returns my sum. Alright, so all this function does is I'm gonna run it just to make sure there's no bugs, but all this function does, you pass it in a number or 3 numbers, and it will give you the sum of those numbers. So let's test it. My add is, if I had 1, 2, 3, this should be 6, right? 3 plus 2 is 5 plus 1. So shift enter, and the return is 6. So this function does what we expect it to do. So, but the problem with this, so even though this function is pretty much what it's doing is taking in values as arguments, right? Giving all those values, take all the values down and then add them together and return the sum. So the question is, what if that you built your function to do this, take in 3 arguments, but you really want it to be dynamic where it could take in 4, 5, 6, 20 arguments, 10 arguments, but you still want the function to work regardless of the size of the argument. So for instance, if I try to do, all right, my add, just to show you what I'm talking about, 1, 2, 3, 4. Say I wanted 4 numbers to add together. I do shift enter. It gives you an error. It says it only takes 3 positional arguments, but 4 was listed. So if the arguments are just being added to just add to the size of an operation, this is a good case where having the args command makes sense, because you can let the user create a list of all the numbers that they want to sum together, and then use the args command for that, and then you will be able to pass that list in, and it will return back what you need. So let's do that. So for instance, the difference in the equation would be this, and what I'm going to do so you can see what I've changed, I'm going to keep the original definition, and I'm going to copy it and then make changes to it. Alright, so for the new myAdd, instead of passing in individual numbers, we're going to pass in star arg. And so star args now is what's going to get passed in. And instead of doing the sum this way, the reason why this is complaining because we don't have those variables anymore. This is going to, usually what's passed in is a list. So what we're going to do is get the sum of the list, of which is the arguments that are being passed, to be able to get the sum to return. So all we need to return here is the sum of the args. You don't even need this line of code no more, because the reason why you had this, you was just summing up what was put in as the for the arguments. Since you know the argument is going to be passed as a list, you don't even have to do that part anymore. So we can remove this part of the equation. So all we need now to do what we did up here and to make it dynamic was to bring in the args command, star args, meaning a list is going to be passed into this command. And if I'm not mistaken, I think when you pass the list, you have to have the star as well, but we'll test that out when we look at it. So if I run this line of code, okay, now when I try to run my add up here, it's not going to work like this. So when I'm back up here and I do shift enter, oh, my bad, it actually does work. Wow, I didn't even know that. I just learned something myself, because I normally pass the args back as a list. I've never really passed them one at a time. So wow, this works more dynamic than I thought it does. So now, because this argument is looked at as a list, even though if you pass it as a I didn't realize as you pass it as individual arguments that it sums up, but even if you don't pass it as a list, it's already dynamic. So remember the first one, it was 6, but this one gave us an error. But now when we do shift enter, it's 10. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this function now, because the arguments are dynamic, it can dynamically take 1 argument or up to 100 arguments. The add function will not be broken based on needing to because it didn't have enough arguments to handle from the user. But the way I was talking about, I want to show this way, since even though this works. Say if I wanted to get the same results as this, I would create a list, like I would call it my numbers is equal to open brackets 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we have this list here that's stored in memory. So if I pass this list into this parameter, this is what I don't think you can do. I don't think you can do it without the star, but I'm curious. Shift enter. All right, type error. It's saying that unsupported type. It doesn't know what to do with this, because the function doesn't naturally take in a type int and list in this way. So all you have to do when you create the list is put the star here. So once you put the star there, and then do shift enter, it's going to be 10. So if you want to pass it by list, put the star in the name of the list and do it. If you want to pass it by value, individual values, you can just put them in 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. I can honestly say probably in a production situation, you'll probably pass it by a list, because you don't know how many commas. Like, if you had to pass this in this way, I wouldn't want to have to deal with the whole comma system that you have to deal with when you pass it in, where if you pass it all in as a list, it's a one parameter pass, and then everything else works. So for instance, if I go up here and change, maybe put 56, 23, 12, 11, say that's the numbers. Go back down here, shift 112. So that's 112 some. So this is the args. So now let's talk about k-args or kw-args. All right, so the difference literally is that instead of passing a list, we will pass a dictionary. So what I'm gonna do to make this the easiest way, I'm gonna create a dictionary of what we just created, and then I'm gonna add one more list to the dictionary. That just maybe one more item to the dictionary, like my name, so you can see how adding my name, how I can access that information separately from the other side of the dictionary. All right, so what we're gonna do here, so make my notes. This is the star args example. Okay, and this is going to be the star kw args example. All right, so same topic. So this time I'm gonna create a dictionary called data. It's gonna have this numbers list in it, and it's also going to have my name is just another object. So we're gonna say data is equal to squarely brackets to open it. We're gonna call it numbers, and then I want the actual numbers, my numbers. It's the list. Then I'm gonna do a comma, and then the second one I'm going to call it a name. The key is name, and then the data is my name, Michael Hamilton. So we have two objects. Remember, a dictionary recap. So data.keys, right? You have two keys, numbers and names. So data dot, not dot, open brackets, numbers. If you do this, it gives you the values that we created. We had created up here before. And then if you do data names, the name, yep, it gives you my name, right? So let's show you how I can use this in the same equation. So I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna copy it down here now, because I'm gonna change it again. This time I'm gonna get it to work with k-args. And the only difference really is between the two is that with k-args, you just got to know, got to point to the right dictionary element keys. You got to tell it what keys you want it to do those operations on. Okay, so first I want to say, like, I'm gonna do this in two steps so you can see how it works. Print, okay, the sum of the items are, then I'm gonna do a comma, and then I'm gonna say k-args, because that's the name of the argument. You don't use the little star for this. Open brackets, and then I pick numbers, because numbers has the data that I want to add. Okay, and then I'm gonna have another enter print, and I'm gonna say the user that requested this action is, and I'm gonna put k-args, and then I'm gonna put name. Okay, so I think that should be, and then for this case we don't even need to return anything. We just want to do those two prints. Alright, so I'm gonna run it just to make sure there's no bugs. So the beauty about this is that, what if, this case is when you have more than one set of like you have a more than just one set of data that you want to be processed, and once it goes into the function, each data group needs to be processed differently. So for this function I just created, the first data group is the numbers key and data, the numbers reference data, which needs to be summed, And then the name data was used to let the computer to be able to tell you who made the request, because you know in this case the request person is within the data, because the dictionary holds the numbers to be added together as well as the name of the requester. So a lot of times information that might need to be grouped together, or like records data, you might pass that entire dictionary of records into using the KArgs, and once that data has been passed through, the rest of your formula, the rest of your code uses aspects of it to be able to do its operations. And that's pretty much what's happening here with the KArg. So for it to run this, all we have to do is pass in now my add requires a dictionary, so we did star and the name of the dictionary. In this case, the name of the dictionary is data. So once data is passed in, this function has access to those two keys and the data that's located with those key names. So when I do shift enter here, okay, what did I do wrong? Oh, I see the problem. All right, I'm glad this error happened. All right, so the problem is here. Hold on, give me a second. Like always, I always trip out when I do something and then it doesn't work. Oh, okay, I just looked at my notes. I'm gonna show you this. The problem is this: Args uses 1 asterisk. KArgs uses 2 asterisks. So that's the mistake I've made. I didn't have the second asterisk. Okay, so now if I add in the second asterisk, oh, not here. No, I think it's here too, right? Let me look at my notes one more time. I want to make sure I'm doing this right. Yes, that's my mistake. I made a syntax error. This requires 2 asterisks, not 1 asterisk. So I need to rerun this part. Shift enter. And now when I run data, it says 1 position. Oh, same thing. This is saying that it should have been, it takes no positional arguments, but 2 was given. And the problem is that this is an error because I don't have a list. I don't have I didn't set it up to take in args. So it doesn't know what to do with this. So that's the reason why it's giving this error. So I need to add an extra asterisk there. Now I do shift enter. And there we go. The sum of the, oh, this is hilarious. The sum of the items is just not the list. This is another mistake, but I'm gonna correct it. And then the user request action, the user that requested this action is Michael Hamilton. So you see the data was split into 2 groups. The reason why this printed out a list instead of gave me the sum is because I didn't put the sum function here. So I'm gonna go back up here and say sum, which is a function in it is a function in a natural built-in function in Python. So I'm gonna rerun this line here just to make sure that's done. Shift enter. Okay, now when I run this line here, the sum is 112. So the sum of the items are 112. The user that requested this item is Michael Hamilton. So now you have how to use KArgs for supplying your data with dictionary data, and this uses it to supply your data with list data. But it also can be used as a if it's just one type of parameter, like the parameter is pretty much the same parameter but just multiple of them. I see now that that actually works, that you could just put them in one at a time as arguments to the function as well. You don't have to actually pass it as a list, but most commonly you will pass it as a list. All right, KArgs. Args. You know what? The only other thing I can think of that we haven't covered on functions, and we'll cover it now, is lambda functions. Look at my notes for lambda. See if I have something I can share with you about them. Hold on. All right, here we go. So what are lambda? A lambda function is a function that doesn't have a name. So it's like I call them inline functions, like functions where I need a function to do something really quick. I'm just going to inline the function to create the function, tell it what value you want to change, and then all of a sudden you can utilize it without having to do this whole define and all of this stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and try one. And then I think once you see an example, it'll make sense. So say we wanted to create a function. I guess let's do an example where we create the function using the traditional approach, and then we'll create the exact same function using lambda. I think that'll be a good example. So let's say we wanted a function that just add 5. We'll call it add by 5. And then it takes in a number. Okay, so the number comes in, you add it by 5. So all I'm gonna do is return, because I just wanted to print out the number plus 5. Look at the easiest of examples. All right, so we got this add by 5 function. I just ran it. So if I say add by 5 and I put in the number 20, I should get 25 back. All right, so we're gonna create a add by 5 part 2, a second version. We'll call it SV, add by 5 underscore SV, and it's gonna do the exact same thing, except the function is going to be built using lambda instead of using this traditional function build. So add by 5 2. You just call it no, what I say, add by 5 SV second version is equal to, all right, there's a keyword called lambda. Lambda is the word that starts the whole function building process. But instead of naming it, so I'm gonna say lambda. Okay, I don't have a name, but I do have to tell it what's being passed. In this case, it's num is the argument. So lambda num is the argument. So this that's here is actually right here. So whatever parameters, even if it's a comma of 3 or 4 or 5 of them, whatever you have there, that's where you put this. So that's num. Okay. All right. Then the next step is that I think it's colon, and then what the expression is. So it's lambda, the arguments, and then the expression. So because this function is so small, this is one of them you would definitely probably use a lambda for. So you'll just say num plus 5, because that's what we're doing. You don't need a return. It's going to automatically, I think by default in this one, because it's a number, it's going to automatically make it a return statement. But if this was just an operation, you wouldn't have any return. The return would be the data that's been changed using the function. Anyway, that's past this course. So when we shift enter here, what we did, we created the exact same function twice. So if I say add by 5 SV and I type in 20, just like we did in the first function, shift enter, the results is 25. This function and this function are identical. I'm gonna do one more. Let's do my add SV. This is the the second edition of the first one. I'm not going to do all that make it more complicated. I want to do this one. Well, we had 3 parameters and we summed them, returned the sum. So first, you type in equal to lambda. All right, and we had 3, right? num1, num2, num3. That's the 3 parameters. Then you had num3. Then you have colon. All right, and then what did we do in that one? We summed the 3, right? num1 plus num2 plus num3. I don't think we need the variable. I think this is all we need. So when we run my add with 3 numbers, again 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2. See, it even lets you know it's looking for 3 of them when you do the tab way. I'll just show you that. When you type a function and you press tab while it's being written, it'll automatically put placeholders for where you need to pass in arguments. I think that's the first time I've done that. I'm gonna do this again so you can see it. I said my add. I saw it building. I went down and pressed tab. When you press tab, it's expecting that for this function to work, you're going to pass it num1, num2, and num3. That's what you saw. So what I'm doing, I'm making up what I want num1 to be. I think up here we had it at what, 1, 2, 3. So num1 I need to be 1, num2 I need to be 2, and num3 I need to be 3. So these requirements are because of this part of your function expression, because these are the parameters you're setting for the function real time. All right, so when I do shift enter 9, this should give me 6. It does. Yep. And it's not dynamic, right? Because that's something I'll let you practice how to create the dynamic version using Lambda with the args and stuff. But it definitely does. These two functions do exactly what this function does and what that function do. What the original version of this function. Original version of that function. All right. So let's do a recap. So for this is the conclusion of the functions tutorial. We talked about three core things. We talked about the args, the star args, which allows you to create a list of parameters that needs to be processed. And you had the double star KW args, which allows you to create a dictionary of data that needs to be processed. We talked about how to use the star arg both in the parameter creation and in the argument position. So it'll allow you to pass in a list to be able to do the operations. We also talked about how, because it's a list, and I didn't even know this before I started working on it, that you could just personally just press comma and keep adding positional, adding parameters. Adding arguments to the function, and it will automatically deal with that. I guess it converts it to a list and then actually spit out the sum. We also talked about creating a dictionary that had two keys of data and passing that dictionary in to be able to use a key to get the first part of the data, and then use a second key to be able to print out my name to the screen. And then lastly, we talked about lambda, which is an anonymous function, means it doesn't have a name. And we showed examples, or I showed examples of how you can recreate the add by 5 function to be able to add the number by 5 without actually having to define the function itself. So that's all the three core topics of this tutorial. And I think these 3 core topics, again, I wouldn't say they necessary to know as a fundamental. Some people would consider this not a fundamental thing, but in my mind, I think it is a fundamental thing. Being able to understand how to make your code dynamic, how to make it where you don't have to have everything all hard coded, make it soft coded, because it is a skill set that people would be looking for, that you know how to create clean code or a very good dynamic code. I think it's worth putting it in this video set. All right, everyone. That's it. Thank you for watching this tutorial. Take care and happy programming.